I want to acknowledge first the elders that are here from all the different communities, and the leaders and the chiefs and the grand chiefs and the captains from our nations. I'm thanking you for coming to see me. And I also want to recognize my friend, your new president, David Dingwall, who I've known for some time, and who's about to find out how good of a golfer I am. Tomorrow at noon. And we're both left-handed, and anybody can be right-handed, as we know. But it takes skill, as he said, it takes skills to be a left-handed golfer. We'll see how much skill he has. I want to thank all of you for being here. I know you didn't have to be here, but I appreciate the fact that you came and to listen to what I have to say. I'm going to speak a lot about myself, my own experience in post-secondary education. I think in that way, by sharing my own journey in higher learning, that the reforms that we need will be very clear. Ininu ni na misupais tukuschi utago pigyan. I am a Cree from Grand Rapids. That's where I was raised. Achinapo ewi ayamian istatagixkente mektansation axian. I want to use my language just for a little bit. So you get used to the sound of another language in this country, one that is not official to this country, but nonetheless still one of the beautiful languages that we have here in Canada. Maga, ayunito ni matstan, me wasena pesisian, kueske gisno magwian tan sitesip matsian. And I want to begin by just telling you something you all know, that as children, our parents do their best to teach us good values on how to behave, not only as children, but how to become men and women, how to contribute to your people, and how to make sure that you leave space for the coming generations. I went to university at a very advanced age. I had not completed high school. I had failed grade 12. I had gone to a white town away from my community since we didn't have high school in Grand Rapids. But I had succeeded in grade 10 and grade 11, but for some reason, I failed 2 courses in grade 12 and was intent on going back to finish them and get my high school diploma, but I never returned because I ended up getting a job and I started working and I loved the money, and there was no money in the high school, so I never went back. But I was always interested in higher learning, like learning more about many things. And I was in some ways self-educated, I guess, by taking an interest in different things that I came upon, like the life of Mahatma Gandhi, for example, was something that was of great interest to me. And I learned a lot from reading about his own life as a lawyer, but also as a political leader for his people. And I particularly liked his philosophy of nonviolence in dealing with a colonial master and the idea of self-rule. So eventually I ended up applying to go to the University of Manitoba to be a student. And of course I didn't have what was required in terms of admission, so I had to do it through an access program, a special access program. It was called a Special Mature Student Program. I was pretty special, but not that mature at that time. And, but now I'm mature, not that special. But I'm very thankful, though, to the University of Manitoba and to the government of Manitoba for making it possible to have an access program for that for people like myself who didn't have a complete high school. Because we have the intellect, we have the intelligence. We may be lacking in terms of writing skills and reading skills, but the reality is that we have good brains. And you don't have to have a complete high school to go beyond that for higher learning, as we call it, in post-secondary education. And I remember coming into this university admissions office at the University of Manitoba and walking into this registrar's office, and I'll never forget this sign in front of this lady's desk, and she was behind the desk. And I noticed that beside her was these box of cigarettes, cigars. And I thought she was a cigar-smoking secretary. But the sign said, Ms. White. That's, like a pretty intimidating name. When you're a Cree kid, and you're still not confident about yourself, and you're trying to build a future, but geez, you're not that confident. And then anyway, it was kind of funny, I thought, and I remember that. But she helped me. She took an interest in me, and that's very important, that someone takes an interest in you. She didn't have to, but I guess maybe she felt I had some potential. And I remember talking to her that I wanted to take summer school. This was summer school, and 2 courses. And she said, what would you like to take? I said, well, I was good in mathematics. I'd like to take mathematics. And I was also interested in history. I wouldn't mind taking history. And she says to me, no, you don't want to do that. Because mathematics at the university is quite different than mathematics in high school. Far more difficult, more complicated. And history at that level is not social studies at high school. And so she was very wise. And so because of her counseling, I took a course in sociology and anthropology. Soft courses, right? But her objective was to make sure I passed those 2 courses so I can keep going. And as they say, the rest is history. But someone had to give you an opportunity. And I'm sure there's a lot of Indigenous people all over in the Maritimes who would like to return to some higher learning, some post-secondary education, and may not have the required requisites imposed by the different faculties and administrations of different universities in the Maritimes. So an access program was my opportunity, my path to, should I say success? I guess I shouldn't be afraid to say that. You'll notice that our people are very reluctant to brag about themselves. It's part of our culture to not do that. So don't be surprised if even Steve Augustine, who has achieved a lot, never broadcasts his achievements. It's not part of our culture to do that. So, the first year that I took a full program of studies, and after summer school, I was on the registration line with Elijah Harper. Many of you guys know Elijah Harper. He was a hero of ours who stopped Meech Lake. So he was in first year with me. and a few others. There was only 11 of us Indigenous students at the University of Manitoba in 1972. Only 11 of us in that particular year. Now, today, at the University of Manitoba, there's over 2,500 Indigenous students in that institution alone. So you can see that changes are happening, progress is being made, and advances are taking place every day in the lives of individuals. And that our own brain thrust is being developed in these institutions. And that leadership is going to emerge in this country. And because of that, this country is going to change and evolve in a better way. Because those young people, 2,500 in that institution alone, but a total of almost 6,000 in that province when you count the other universities, are going to have an impact in the future of this country. I have no doubt about that. And here in your provinces, the Maritimes, you have that opportunity to do the same. Big time. Not modestly or moderately, but big time. You make it a priority for all the institutions to give access to Indigenous people for higher learning and to make sure that steps are taken while they're in the institutions for them to succeed. And they will make an impact in your provinces in a positive way. One of the most demanding, I would say, pressures that we have as people is the idea of belonging. We want to belong. It's very important, a sense of belonging. And I recall, at the University of Manitoba, not feeling that. Not feeling that because the curriculum did not make me feel like I should belong. Because there was nothing there for Indigenous people. The curriculum was for, other than the sciences, I would say, when it came to the social sciences, was for Western-based knowledge and experiences. Something I couldn't relate to, something that was not part of my history. So I obviously felt, along with the other Indigenous students, a sense of alienation, a feeling that I did not belong. Because of that, we set out to change the university. We formed an organization, and we started pressuring for some minor changes, including this idea of a student allowance for Indigenous students. And the reason why we did that is because as we were walking around the institution at the University of Manitoba, we could see the student allowance for the general population of students. And we also saw a student allowance for international students. So we said to ourselves, why not a student allowance for ourselves as Aboriginal students, as Indigenous students? So we began negotiating for our own allowance at the university. And we did succeed in getting a small little office the size of maybe 5 telephone booths. But we were quite happy with that because we had our own place. Because, like I said, it was important to have a sense of belonging. And then we were not content with that. We were not happy with that. We wanted more. We wanted the curriculum to change. So we started negotiating for a Native Studies program. We wanted to make sure that we had our own school of studies involving our history, our politics, our culture, our knowledge, and so on. And that all this belonged in the institution, that our knowledge belonged to, not just ourselves as individuals. We were not immediately successful on that score because there was resistance within the faculty and the administration. And for me, I've always wondered why a good thing is resisted. But I guess they had their reasons. And to this day, I don't accept their reasons, whatever they are. So then something happened. Sometimes God sends you something. Something happened. There was a group of students from the Department of engineering students, and at the end of the third year of their education, when they were about to graduate, they would normally have what they call a party, I guess some kind of a party. And they would do something out of the ordinary, and generally something even not acceptable in their society. But this time they decided that what they wanted to do was expose the Indians. So they wanted to expose the Indians as they understood the Indians, they thought. So they took cameras and they started going to all the different pubs in Main Street, Canada, in Main Street, Winnipeg. Started taking pictures of my people in the bars. And then they came back, and I guess they must have laughed about it. I don't know what they did, but they wrote a paper about it, an article in a paper they called The Cursor, which was their engineering paper. And the title of that paper was, Do Indians Ski? And I remember saying to my friends and my colleagues in the Native Student Organization, I don't know if they ski, but they go to bingo. So, you know, like, because you have to have a sense of humor when you encounter racist ideas. Otherwise, anger will prevail, and your response will reflect the anger. So they portrayed us as drunks, as lazy people, people that were dependent on welfare and all that. And we took exception to that. It was not who the people, my parents were, and it did not describe anybody in my community, and it was not the people that I respected and loved. So by that time, we were pretty smart in a way. On white society, we were getting to be quite familiar with it. And we had known that the Jewish people had experienced severe harm because of racist attitudes during the Second World War. So we hired a Jewish lawyer. I figured a Jewish lawyer would know something about racism and would know what to do with it in terms of combating it in the legal process. And we threatened to take the university to court, including the Department of Engineering. The result was interesting because for the first time, the president would meet with us of the university. And for the first time, the dean of engineering would come and plead with us as students. Can you imagine? There I am as a president of the student body, and there's only 11 of us, and they have to come and talk to us about finding a solution other than going to court. So we came up with a plan. And the plan was this: we will teach these young engineers who our people are. And they will learn through research and education. They will have to find out the truth about our history, about our colonial experience. And they also have to find out about the impact of racism in our lives. So they had to redo the Cursor, their paper, and produce different articles that reflected the contributions of our people. generally to Canada, but to the world in general. So they found out that potatoes came from us, for example, right? And that tobacco was one of our sacred plants and so on. But more than that, they also had to learn about the impact of colonialism on our societies and our future as a people. So we worked with them when they were doing their research, and we would talk with them, and then we would grade them, and we would send them back and get them to redo the paper until we were content that they had learned more about our people. So there was two schools of thought within our own organization. There were some of our students wanted them expelled, but that wasn't the prevailing opinion. Most of us thought we should just teach them. And if by teaching them, they'll know not to do it again. So the result was this. We had meetings in Winnipeg with the general public. The Indigenous community came forward and supported us. It would be like your friendship centers here, coming forward to support us, to support you. And we had public meetings about the human condition of Indigenous people living in the city, particularly the people who are just migrating there into the urban centers. And we had the Dean of Engineering try to explain himself to the general population about what was going to be done, what changes will be made at the university. And we ended up having negotiations with the Senate and the President for Native Studies in Manitoba. And the end result, of course, was that, the Department of Native Studies, because the university realized that they had to do something, and that the issues that we were initially raising about our desire to belong and to be respected on our terms was important to the institution. So they had to make a public apology in the papers. There's two papers at that time in Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Free Press and the Winnipeg Tribune. So there had to be front page apologies made by the engineering students and the university. And then they had to widely distribute the new paper that they made about our people. And one of the results subsequently was the access program to engineering for Indigenous students, an access program for our people to become engineers. And in the course of many years, a few decades later, the university has graduated 120 engineers from the Department of Engineering. So that's why I said that sometimes God sends you a gift, and that's the context of my statement, that God sends you a gift. Because an issue like that, that impacts an institution like a university, requires the response of people, good people in the institution, to make the corrective measures needed to ensure the institution does not maintain a racist identity. So I wanted to share that with you in part as I carry on with my conversation with you, just so you have an idea that reforms that we seek as Indigenous people don't always have to have a shock factor behind them. That maybe if we say we need our own building, our own facility within your university for Indigenous people, then maybe we should work towards that. Because what happened in Manitoba subsequently to my departure and many years later is that the university raised capital over a period of years to build the Mi'kmaq building, Mi'kmaq, which is the Eagle Lodge. and it's a facility for Indigenous students at the university, where all student services for Indigenous students are situated, and where some instructions take place, where curriculum is developed and so on. Wouldn't that be a great achievement for your university to work together with the Mi'kmaq Confederacy, but also with the chiefs of your province, to create such a facility somewhere within your land? And that would be a great statement about belonging. It would be a great achievement about ensuring that in 10 years from now, you can say with great pride that you have graduated not 10 or 20 or 100, but thousands of Indigenous students from different fields available in university. So that's not a challenge to you, it's just an idea. Because I know it's happened in other places as well. There's a House of Learning in British Columbia, the University of British Columbia. So the University of Manitoba is not the only university that's made those gains over in the past 20 years or so. I also wanted to talk about this idea that people mention nowadays as the indigenization of the university. In my time, we never used that language, the indigenization. In my time, we just used this idea that there has to be a reflection of our personality in the institution. We have to see images within the university that gives us a sense of belonging. And those images have to be reflected back to us in the curriculum, in the administration. And that ideally it shouldn't be segregated, but somehow integrated into the entire institution. And if that's what indigenization now means, then I support it. But we don't need a fancy word. We don't need a fancy term to make, to do the right thing, is my point. And many of you, I gather, would have been educated recently about the impact of the residential schools on Indigenous people across the country, and that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has produced a report challenging institutions like yours to transform themselves. And it's not such a big book after all. Look at it. I think anybody can do this one. You can read that in 10 minutes. And on the back of it is the Declaration of Indigenous Rights, which is a UN declaration about what the ideal relationship should be between Indigenous people, their nations, and the state, the nation state or the country. And it's about this idea of obligation and responsibilities on both sides, about coexistence, about this idea of creating something together, the co-creation of a country, something that didn't happen in 1867. So that challenge remains for all of us about how we transform this country so that we all have a sense of belonging and we all have a stake in its success, in its future. Because right now, for First Nations people, there is a feeling of alienation that's been there for many years. And that alienation is always there because of the gaps that exist in terms of social and economic opportunities that are absent with our communities. I currently work with about 49 communities in Northern Ontario. They've hired me as their lead negotiator to transform the health system, the healthcare system in Northern Ontario. And that deals with issues of access to doctors and hospitals. It deals with the creation of programs, the co-creation of programs to deal with suicides in our communities, and also to deal with the epidemic of dialysis in our communities, and a way of preventing the rise of cancer and heart diseases of our people. So these are gaps that Canadians don't know because they've never lived in our communities. They have no idea what it means to get sick in a small community with no doctor around, or to be flown away from your community in order to get services. No Canadian should use a plane as their hospital. No Canadian should be subjected to that kind of treatment in a rich country like this one. So my mission, my job is to work with those communities and help in transforming that system. And in many ways, it's all about belonging there too. The idea, I am accepted, I am appreciated. You don't have to love me, but at least respect me. I am respected. And I am treated not any differently than how other people are treated, how Canadians are treated with respect to access to health services in this country. My friend, your president, Mr. Dingwall, was the Minister of Health at one time, and you'll know exactly what I am talking about. Because in his time, these issues were already there, and the gaps have not been closed. So the Indigenous leaders, the chiefs and the councils throughout this country, they have a major responsibility, but they don't have the resources, they don't have the fiscal resources that are needed to address those responsibilities. And I know Canadians think that sometimes we get something for nothing, that we get too much and all that. But live in our community for a while, you'll think very different. And you'll become one of the champions for us, for equity and for equal access to services that are available in Canada. And you might even agree with us that certain things should be free in this country. Education should be free for all Canadians. They do that in Costa Rica, why can't we do it in this country? And we all know that when it comes to healthcare, that's a public responsibility of the Crown. And they do things for us, but not enough. Pharmacare should be free for Canadians. And if these services were available to everybody, I think it would go a long ways to eliminating the idea that I'm getting something that you're not getting, or you're getting something that I'm not getting. And that's the advantage of universal services by our public governments. But I'm not here so much to change your country. I gave up on that a long time ago. I'm going to leave that to the young people, see what they can do. And I know they will make a difference. Can you imagine my daughter is a lawyer in British Columbia. I have a son who's becoming a lawyer in Ontario and Toronto. And I have two other children that who are doing things for their respective communities where they live. And I'm hoping my grandchildren will have opportunities to contribute to their community, their Indigenous community, and by doing that, contributing to the country. I want one of my grandchildren to become a doctor. I don't know if that's going to happen. But these are not just my dreams, you see. These are the dreams of many Indigenous parents and grandparents across the country. And if these dreams were to be realized, can you imagine how different our communities will look like in 20 years from now? And that's the reason why I think higher learning, post-secondary education can make a great impact in terms of promoting equality across the land. All of you who are here of more than high school, you have experiences, you have knowledge, you have skills, and for that reason, you're either in the middle class or the upper middle class of income in this country, for that reason alone. Our mission should be to make sure that 90% of the population is there. Can you imagine if we were to achieve that in indigenous communities? There would be a rise, the rise of the nations across the land. Our people would be quite contributing, I think, not only to their own economy, but to the economy of the country. And in fact, this idea is not mine. This idea was shared with Canadians by the Royal Commission of Aboriginal People, but the governments didn't pay attention to it. They ignored it, and they still don't pay attention to that. That if you invest now on education for Indigenous people, if you invest in the millions of dollars in post-secondary education, it will reap rewards for the country in terms of the gross national product, without question. So this is the connection that we have to make between education and the economy. And it has to become our mantra as a people, that an educated people will also increase the economic benefits for themselves, not just for themselves, but for their children, but also for their country. That's the formula that works for most Canadians. And besides, I need money to golf. And if I don't have an education and if I don't have a good job, I'm not going to be able to afford that expensive game. So what more can I say to you? I wanted to share something about myself with you, about my own doubts as a person, my own self-doubts about my abilities and my capacity to achieve my goals. And one day, living in Grand Rapids, I applied for a job with Social Services Manitoba, and the regional director's office was in Nepal, Manitoba, and they were looking for an assistant to a community development officer. And at that time, I was already involved in community organization. I was already helping my people fight City Hall, as they say, and I was sort of steeped in the learning of Saul Alinsky and political activists like that. So I applied for this job thinking, I'm qualified for this position. And I sent in a letter that I drafted myself as to why I wanted that position. I was interviewed. I didn't get the position. I didn't get the job. And my friend who had been encouraging me to apply was the community development officer. He was from the Maritimes. And he said to me afterwards, he said, you know what, that regional director, Paul accused me of writing that letter for you. So you can see, like, I was probably 18 or 19 years old then. And people doubted my ability to write a good letter. That's when I decided, you see, that if other people have doubts about me, I better not have any doubts about myself. And that's when I decided that I will get to university. And my original goal was to become a social worker, to go to the School of Social Work. because my idea was that's how I'm going to help my people. But once I got to the institution and people got to know me there, like my teachers, my professors, they would then talk to me about, if you really want to help your people, you should become a lawyer. And that's how I was diverted from my goal, from being a social worker. But that's not the only time I changed my goal. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I wanted to be a priest. And it's a good thing I didn't become a priest, otherwise I'd be your pope today. And then I would have to apologize for the residential schools. So my point is this. It's okay to change your mind about your goals. Like maybe originally you want to be a teacher, but in the end you might become an engineer, and so on. But right now, for many Indigenous students, they don't even have that option. So we have to create that option for them so they can make choices, that they can change their mind, and they can succeed in their ultimate decision to become someone or something in their community or in their society or in the country. In Manitoba, one of my most recent mistakes was to be the president of the NDP in Manitoba. I became the president of a mainstream party, and I had made a promise to myself that I would never serve two masters, that I would be true to my canoe or my camp. But I said, okay, I'll try it once. It was an experience for sure to be the president of a mainstream party. And we may see in Manitoba the first Aboriginal person as the premier of the province. We may see that. But there's no reason why we can't see that in the Maritimes. Because over the years, I have modified my views many times about this idea of my camp and your camp. And one of the documents that's really helped me come to that conclusion is the Declaration of Indigenous Rights. For me, it is the blueprint for coexistence between Indigenous nations and Canada. It's really about not only the self-determination of my people, but it's also about the acceptance by Canada of that self-determination of my people. And it's not about segregation or separate and apart. It's not about secession from Canada like what we heard from Quebec. It's about a sense of belonging, being part of something, but doing it together. Doing it together. Here, imagine the progress that can be made across the country if Member 2 was the model for all communities. One of the biggest employers in the region, not just for my people, but for yours. And that's how it should be. And that's nationhood in the making. They're not nations yet. They have a long ways to go yet. Because a nation is not the community. It is the people, the Mi'kmaq people as a group. That's the nation. And that requires our people to reflect on where they've been, where they are now, and where they want to go. But part of it has to be about giving up the Indian Act, giving up the boundaries of the reserve. Not giving up the reserve, but the boundaries that keep our people from thinking only about their community and thinking about the welfare, the future of the nation itself, the people, the Maliseet people, the Mi'kmaq people, the Cree people. This is where we have to go ourselves as a people. And that's a challenge. Because right now, the Prime Minister has pretty much given us the license to develop our nationhoods. We don't need their permission to begin with, but he has said he wants to maintain a nation-to-nation relationship with us. And the obligation rests with us as Indigenous people to make that happen. Not to complain about this or that, but to begin to rise up our people, to restore our nationhood. And that means for the Confederacy and the elected leaders to build something together. And I remember being invited when I was National Chief to the Haida Nation, and they were having a political struggle between the elected leadership and the Haida hereditary chiefs. And I was invited there to somehow help them think about this idea about how they can build something together. They didn't need me to realize that, but it's not that they forgot. It's just that they got so used to this idea that their obligation is to their community only, the people in their respective communities. So we have to broaden our perspective, our mindset as Indigenous leaders, and realize that member two alone will never achieve nationhood, or any of your communities in the Maritimes, or even my community in Mississippi Cree Nation will never achieve nationhood on its own. That it will require a different thinking than what we've been used to for 125 years under the Indian Act. And that's our job. And like it'll be something, our legacy that we leave behind for our grandkids, so they can say, "Ininu nina misipaistu kuchi maga nahewi nina." So they can say, "I am a Cree from Grand Rapids and I belong to the Cree Nation." So Canadians, you have your country, and we want to restore our nations. But we don't want to do it in a way that impairs or impedes your own future as a people. But it will require, on your side, some reflection about how we have been dispossessed of our lands and our resources. And that it will require some tough decisions by our governments to return those lands and resources to us, not necessarily all of them, in order for us to be able to create our own economies that are needed to create jobs for our people and to hire other people to work with us in different fields. We shouldn't have to have casinos to make money. Besides, everybody loses there anyway, except the owners of the casinos. We should have a very broad economic base. But how can you have an economic base on a reserve the size of mine? If you're traveling at 80 kilometers per hour and you're entering one end of my reserve, and to get to the other end, it'll take you no more than 10 minutes. It is not a land base that will sustain an economy. And I remember traveling in Navajo territory, because the reserves in the United States are far bigger than they are in Canada. It's not that the Americans were more generous, it's just that Canada was more greedy. And what happened to us here should never have happened, but it did. Now we have to do something about it. And I remember driving, it took me a whole day to drive across Navajo territory at 100 kilometers per hour. That's why they have an economy. That's why they have their own Supreme Court That's why they have their own court system, why they have their own Department of the Environment, why they have their own Department of the Economy. Because they have the land to do it and the economic base to achieve an economy for themselves. Now, here in Canada, the communities that are most successful in terms of economic development are the ones closest or to the proximity of a major center, a city or a town, like a white town or a big city, like Vancouver, for example, or Kamloops, or Kelowna, or any of these places where First Nations are making great progress and great strides in economic development. It's because they have the economic base to do it. They have the population to be able to do it, because it's not just their population, but the general population that they rely on for an economic base. So shop in Indigenous communities. You know, don't just go to Walmart. If you see an Indigenous business, go support it. You have no idea how much advantage that would give to the local economy of these communities. Now, I've been standing here watching that spot of light ahead of me over there, and I think my eyes are turning brown to blue. And I'm sure that when I leave this podium, I'll see no faces. But I want to meet every one of you. That's what I want to do. If I have the chance to shake your hand, I'd appreciate that. Because ultimately, in our traditions as a people, we believe we are all one race of people. One people, ultimately. And that why remain strangers? There's no need to remain strangers. And that if we open our hearts respectively, we would remove a lot of barriers that keep us apart. So I will end with this statement that every one of us here in this room wants to be respected. And every one of us wants to have a strong sense of belonging, either to a family or to a community, to a village or a town or a university, but they want to belong to something. To me, that's a natural thing. That's a human condition, what I call a human condition. And that is a natural call for us to create bonds together, the sense of belonging. With that, I thank you for your time.